If the Bible tells us that Adam and Eve were the first and only humans created by God, then a question arises that is impossible to ignore. Where did Cain's wife come from? After murdering his brother Abel, Cain expresses fear of being killed by other people. Shortly thereafter, the biblical text states that he took a wife and had a son. But who were these other people? Who was this woman? And how could she exist if, theoretically, humanity was limited to a single family? This apparent contradiction is not some irrelevant detail. On the contrary, it raises one of the most debated and misunderstood questions in the book of Genesis. Did other human beings exist besides Adam and Eve? Does the Bible omit important information? Or is the answer hidden within the text itself, simply overlooked by most readers? Today, we will analyze this mystery based on the biblical account, the historical context, and the chronology of Genesis to discover who Cain's wife really was, and why this answer can completely change the way you understand the beginning of humanity. Prepare to delve into ancient history, explore different interpretations, and challenge your preconceived notions. But before we move forward, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because the answer to this mystery is found in the Bible itself. And by the end of this video, you will realize that this mystery was never truly hidden. We were simply not taught how to see it. The clues have been there all along, waiting for us to connect the dots. Adam and Eve were not merely characters in a short story. They were the progenitors of a race designed for immortality, whose bodies possessed a genetic perfection that we can barely imagine today. The very essence of their being was different, untouched by the decay and degradation that plagues us now. The text of Genesis 5 verse 4 provides us with a vital clue, often ignored in superficial readings. It is a detail that, when examined closely, unlocks a cascade of possibilities. In the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. This detail is the foundation of our first line of investigation. The Bible focuses its narrative on Cain, Abel, and later Seth because of the messianic lineage and the spiritual conflict, but it makes clear that Adam and Eve had many other descendants. The text does not explicitly list them all, but their existence is undeniable. In the context of a life that lasted nearly a millennium, the reproductive capacity of the first couple was vast. Imagine the sheer number of offspring they could have produced over those centuries. Therefore, Cain's wife did not arise from a creative vacuum or from another race, but was most likely his own sister or niece. This conclusion leads us into a complex ethical and biological terrain that must be approached with caution. The very idea can feel unsettling, even repulsive at first. To modern eyes, the idea of Cain marrying a sister causes immediate repulsion due to incest laws. However, as investigators of biblical history, we must apply the principle of legal chronology. Context is everything. The laws prohibiting marriage between close relatives would only be given by God to Moses in Leviticus about 2,500 years after Cain's time. We cannot impose the moral and legal standards of a later era onto the dawn of humanity. In the dawn of humanity, the human genetic heritage was pure, free from the accumulated mutations and defects that make consanguineous marriage dangerous today. The gene pool was still pristine, untouched by the ravages of time and environmental factors. In that period, marrying a close relative was not only a necessity for the expansion of the species, but it was biologically safe. It was a matter of survival. Cain's wife, therefore, would have been one of the many sons and daughters briefly mentioned in the text, a woman who either went with him into exile or was already living in other regions as the original family expanded. She was a part of Adam's lineage, sharing the same blood and the same potential. The second theory explored by many scholars of apocryphal texts and ancient traditions suggests that Earth's population was much larger than we imagine at the time Cain founded his city. This perspective challenges the notion that Adam and Eve were the sole origin of all human life. Although Genesis highlights the central family drama, the time elapsed between Cain's birth and Abel's murder may have been decades or even more than a century. The Bible condenses vast periods of time into a relatively small number of verses, leaving much to our interpretation. Imagine the exponential growth of a family in which each couple has dozens of children and death is a rare event. The population could have exploded in a relatively short period of time. When Cain departed for the land of Nod, He was not entering an empty wilderness, but a region that could have been colonized by his own brothers, nephews, and grandchildren. The land of Nod literally means land of wandering or land of exile. This suggests that the region received its name because of Cain's condition, not because an independent civilization already existed there. It was a land of outcasts, a place for those who had strayed from the original family. Cain's wife, under this perspective, would have been a descendant of Adam who chose to follow the rebellious brother or who already lived on the fringes of the territory explored by the original family. She was a fellow traveler, someone who shared his fate and his desire for a new life. The third theory, which flirts with more provocative and complex interpretations, questions whether Adam and Eve were truly the only human beings created or whether they were the only ones created in the image and likeness of God for a specific purpose. This is a more controversial idea that challenges the traditional understanding of Genesis. Some proponents of the gap theory or pre-Adamite interpretation suggest that Genesis chapter 1 narrates the creation of humanity in general terms, while chapter 2 focuses on the creation of Adam as a priestly representative. This interpretation posits the existence of humans before Adam, beings who were not part of the covenant with God. Following this line of reasoning, Cain could have found his wife among these pre-existing populations. However, this theory faces serious theological challenges because the Bible categorically states that Adam was the first man and Eve the mother of all living. It is a point of contention among theologians and scholars. As responsible investigators, we must weigh the evidence. The explanation most consistent with the entirety of the biblical text is that Cain's wife was a direct descendant of Adam, and a mystery of her origin exists only because the biblical author chose to economize genealogical details in order to focus on the theological message of the fall and redemption. It is the most straightforward and biblically sound interpretation. The construction of the city of Enoch by Cain is another crucial point in this investigation. Why would a fugitive build a city if he were alone with his wife? The existence of a city presupposes a population. It implies the presence of others, people who would inhabit and contribute to this new settlement. This reinforces the thesis that by the time Cain settled in Nod, Adam's descendants had already multiplied into the thousands. The original family had expanded far beyond just a handful of individuals. Cain's fear of being killed by anyone was the fear of blood vengeance carried out by his own relatives who would know about the fratricide committed against Abel. He knew that his actions had consequences and that his own family might seek retribution. Cain's wife, therefore, is the piece that unites the lineage of rebellion. She represents the first branch of a humanity that chose to walk away from the face of God, developing arts, metallurgy, and cities while carrying the mark of original separation. She is a symbol of the human desire for independence and self-reliance. When we analyze Cain's profile, we see a man marked by divine protection, but also by bitterness. He was a man of contradictions, both blessed and cursed. His wife, whoever she was, shared the destiny of a man who was the first to build a system of human security, the city in opposition to dependence on God. She stood by him, supporting his ambition and his vision. The investigation into her identity leads us to understand that the Bible is not concerned with providing a detailed population census, but with tracing the line of conflict between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. It is a story of spiritual warfare, of the battle between good and evil. Cain's wife appears in the narrative not as an insoluble biological mystery, but as a historical fact that attests to the rapid expansion of the human race under the original blessing of be fruitful and multiply, even under the shadow of sin. She is a testament to the resilience of life and the enduring power of God's command. The depth of this mystery forces us to look at the genetics of that era. If Adam and Eve were created directly by God, their genetic codes contained the fullness of human diversity. They were the source of all the variations we see in humanity today. All skin tones, hair types, and physical characteristics we see today were latent in that first couple. They possessed the potential for all the races and ethnicities that would eventually populate the earth. Cain's wife, being his sister, possessed a compatibility that would be disastrous today, but that in humanity's infancy was the only path to survival. It was a necessary step in the propagation of the species. The silence of Scripture regarding her name or the details of the marriage serves to keep the focus on Cain's moral and spiritual drama. The emphasis is on his sin, his punishment, and his subsequent actions. The case of Cain's wife, when analyzed through the lens of antediluvian longevity and initial genetic perfection, ceases to be a contradiction and becomes a confirmation of the biblical narrative. It is a puzzle that, when properly assembled, reveals a deeper understanding of the early history of humanity. As we move forward in this analysis, we realize that the land of Nod was not a fixed geographical location before Cain, but became a symbol of human existence without God. It represents a state of alienation from the divine presence. Cain's wife, by giving birth to Enoch, helped establish a civilization that, although technologically advanced for its time, was spiritually adrift. She contributed to the creation of a society that was increasingly focused on worldly pursuits rather than spiritual matters. The mystery of her origin teaches us about God's sovereignty and the complexity of human history. It reminds us that God is in control, even when human actions seem to defy his will. We do not need external theories or alien interventions to explain where she came from. The Genesis text itself, with its mention of Adam's sons and daughters, provides a master key to unlock this door sealed by time. The answer is within the pages of the Bible itself, waiting to be discovered. This investigation leads us to a deep reflection on our own origins and on how the history of a single family shaped the destiny of billions. It forces us to confront our own mortality, our own sinfulness, and our own need for redemption. It snorts. The mystery of Cain's wife is an invitation to study the scriptures with the eyes of those who seek truth between the lines, respecting the historical context and the intention of a sacred author. It is a call to engage with the Bible in a thoughtful and critical way, seeking to understand the deeper meaning behind the words. By uncovering who she was, we better understand the magnitude of creation and the consequences of the fall. We gain a greater appreciation for the scope of God's plan and the impact of human choices on the course of history. If you have made it this far, and this deep dive into the roots of humanity has brought clarity or sparked new questions, do not hesitate to share this video with those who also seek answers. Your engagement is what allows us to continue investigating the greatest enigmas of the Bible. Your participation helps us spread the truth and encourage others to explore the mysteries of faith. Subscribe to the channel from Genesis to Revelation. Leave your like and comment below. Which of these perspectives did you find most convincing? We want to hear your thoughts and opinions. The mystery of Cain's wife is only the beginning of our journey through the revelations the scriptures have to offer. There is so much more to discover, so much more to learn. May the search for knowledge bring us ever closer to the truth that sets us free. It is a lifelong pursuit, a journey of discovery that leads us to a deeper understanding of God and ourselves. But now that we have established the biological identity and family context of Cain's wife, we must dive into an even more fascinating and often neglected aspect: the cultural impact and legacy of the lineage that this couple began in Nod. The question is not just who she was, but what impact did she have on the course of human history? If Cain's wife was his sister or niece, as the genetic perfection of that era allowed, what they built together was not merely a family, but the first urban structure in human history from a perspective of rebellion. They were pioneers, forging a new path in a world that was still in its infancy. When we analyze Genesis 4, we see that the birth of Enoch, Cain's son, marks a fundamental transition. It is a turning point in the development of human civilization. Cain, the man condemned to be a fugitive and a wanderer, attempts to defy his divine sentence by building a city. He challenges the very decree that had been placed upon him. He names it after his son Enoch. Here, the presence of Cain's wife becomes the silent pillar of a civilization that would flourish in parallel with the lineage of Seth. She is the unsung heroine, the woman who stood by her husband and helped him build a new world. Through her, Adam's DNA branches into inventors, musicians, and metal workers. She is the mother of a new generation of innovators and artists. Many scholars ask, if the population was so small, how could Cain build a city? The answer lies in our modern perception of urbanism versus the antediluvian reality. A city in that context could be a fortified settlement, a place of protection against the fear Cain felt of being killed by other members of Adam's exponentially growing family. It was a refuge from the dangers of the outside world. Cain's wife, therefore, was not merely a companion in exile. She was the matriarch of a culture of self-sufficiency. She helped create a society that was independent and resourceful. While the lineage of Seth, which would come later, would be characterized by those who began to call upon the name of the Lord, the lineage of Cain, driven by his offspring with his wife, focused on mastering the physical world. These were two distinct paths, two different approaches to life. Jabal, the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock, revolutionized nomadic economy and resource management. He was a pioneer in the field of agriculture, developing new ways to provide for his family and his community. Jubal, the father of all who play the harp and flute, saw art and aesthetics born within this family. He brought music and beauty into the world, enriching the lives of those around him. Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, marked the birth of metallurgy and tool technology. He was a master craftsman, shaping the materials of the earth into tools and weapons. All of this began with the meeting of Cain and his wife in the land of Nod. She witnessed the transformation of a cursed murderer into an architect of empires. She saw him rise from the ashes of his past and create something new. This leads us to a profound theological question. God's common grace allowed that even under a curse, Cain's descendants prospered intellectually and technologically. It demonstrates that God's blessings are not limited to those who are obedient to him. It is crucial to address the discomfort the term incest causes the modern reader. To understand Cain's wife, we must strip ourselves of legal anachronisms. We must understand the context of the time. In Cain's time, there was no law against marriage between close relatives. Why? Because there was no medical necessity nor divine prohibition until the days of Moses about 2,500 years later. The laws against incest were given at a specific point in history for specific reasons. God established the laws of Leviticus concerning kinship only when genetic diversity was broad enough, and the accumulation of genetic mutations made close relative unions dangerous for offspring. The genetic landscape had changed over time, making certain unions more risky. In the beginning, the purity of the genetic code created directly by God in Adam and Eve allowed brothers and sisters to marry without the risk of anomalies. The original gene pool was pristine and uncorrupted. Therefore, Cain's wife was not living in incestuous sin, but was fulfilling the original command to be fruitful and multiply in a scenario where no other option existed. She was simply doing what was necessary to ensure the survival of the human race. Why does the Bible not mention the name of Cain's wife? In ancient genealogies, the focus was almost exclusively on the patriarchal line to establish inheritance, rights, and messianic succession. Women were often overlooked in these historical records. However, the silence regarding her name does not diminish her importance. She represents all the women of the antediluvian era who helped populate the earth at a speed we can scarcely imagine today. She is a symbol of the contribution of women to the early development of human civilization. Consider the longevity. If Adam lived 930 years, his sons and daughters likely had centuries of fertility. This extended lifespan allowed for rapid population growth. Cain's wife could have seen generation after generation of her own descendants, contributing to a demographic explosion that easily explains how this city of Enoch became a population center within a few centuries. Her influence extended far beyond her immediate family. The land of Nod, where Cain's wife lived, means fleeing or wandering. It is poetic and tragic to think that she left the comfort of proximity to Adam and Eve and possibly the place where God's presence was most strongly felt near the entrance of Eden guarded by cherubim to follow a marked man. She chose to leave behind the familiar and embrace the unknown. This shows a pattern of loyalty and the formation of the first family unit outside the original nucleus. She was a pioneer in the creation of new families and new communities. She became the Eve of a lineage that chose human progress over divine reconciliation. Her descendants were driven by a desire for innovation and advancement, but they were also disconnected from their spiritual roots. The analysis of her life forces us to look at the dichotomy of human existence. We are capable of great technological and artistic advances, as her children demonstrated. But without connection to the Creator, we build only cities of Nod, monuments to our own wandering. our achievements are ultimately meaningless without a connection to God. Although archaeology cannot point to a skeleton and say, "This is Cain's wife," Sumerian records and antediluvian king lists often mention figures that echo the Genesis accounts. There are parallels between the biblical narrative and the stories of other ancient cultures. Many ancient cultures speak of civilizing heroes who brought music, metallurgy, and agriculture. These figures often possess similar characteristics to the descendants of Cain. Curiously, these accounts often coincide with the description of Cain's lineage. It suggests that the story of Cain and his descendants has resonated throughout human history. Cain's wife, by supporting this lineage, inserted herself at the foundation of all world mythologies. She is an archetypal figure, representing the challenges and complexities of human existence. She is the anonymous mother of an era of giants and men of renown whose history was almost entirely erased by the flood, leaving only the sacred record to tell us the essential truth. She is a link to a lost world, a world that was destroyed by divine judgment. Some theorists attempt to suggest the existence of pre-Adamite humans to explain Cain's wife, human beings who did not descend from Adam. This theory challenges the traditional understanding of human origins. However, this view directly contradicts the biblical assertion that Adam was the first man and Eve the mother of all living. Genesis 3 verse 20. This is a fundamental point of contention between different interpretations of the Bible. If other peoples existed, the doctrine of original sin and the need for redemption through Christ, the second Adam, would lose their theological foundation. The entire framework of Christian theology would be undermined. Therefore, Cain's wife must have been a descendant of Adam for the biblical narrative to maintain its internal coherence. The consistency of the biblical account is paramount. She is the link that proves that all humanity, regardless of moral inclination, whether the rebellious lineage of Cain or the faithful lineage of Seth, shares the same blood, the same fault, and the same need for a savior. We are all part of the same human family, united by our common heritage and our common need for redemption. When we contemplate this woman, we are led to reflect on choice. She chose to follow Cain. She chose to raise her children in an environment where the father bore a mark of protection, but also of infamy. Her life was a series of choices, each with its own consequences. Her life in the land of Nod mirrors our own journey in a fallen world. Often, we find ourselves building our own cities, seeking security in our possessions and talents, while the spiritual emptiness of Nod persists. We are constantly striving to create our own sense of security and fulfillment, but often find ourselves feeling empty and unfulfilled. The mystery of Cain's wife ceases to be a genealogical curiosity and becomes a lesson about God's sovereignty. It is a reminder that God is in control, even when human actions seem to defy His will. He allowed Cain's lineage to develop, art and science to flourish through the descendants of this woman, proving that God does not withdraw His gifts, even from those who distance themselves from Him. His grace extends to all regardless of their moral standing. This investigation has taken us from basic biology and antediluvian genetics to the deepest theological implications of the fall of man. It has been a journey of discovery, exploring the intersection of science, history, and theology. We learned that the Bible is self-sufficient in its explanations if we read carefully the genealogies and the context of longevity. The answers are there, waiting to be discovered if we are willing to look closely. Cain's wife was a key figure in the foundation of human civilization and in the diversification of skills we still use today. Her influence can be seen in the development of art, technology, and culture. And the silence regarding her specific identity serves to keep the focus on the spiritual message of rebellion versus obedience. The emphasis is on the choices we make and the consequences of those choices. The story of Cain's wife is ultimately a story about family survival and the incredible human capacity to create even in the midst of judgment. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She is not an error in the text nor a plot hole in the divine script. She is proof that God's history with humanity is far more vast and complex than our limited vision can grasp at first glance. She is a reminder that there is always more to learn, more to understand. If we view human history as a great tapestry, Cain's wife is an essential thread that helps form the initial pattern. Without her, there would be no tension between the two lineages that define the entire book of Genesis and culminate in the preservation of faith through Noah. She is an integral part of the story, contributing to the overall narrative. We have reached the end of this deep dive. What once seemed like an unsolvable mystery has now been revealed as a complex and fascinating chapter in the history of humanity. The seemingly insoluble enigma of Cain's wife now unveils itself, accompanied by a subtle musical underscore, as a window into understanding the perfection of the initial creation and the rapid expansion of the human family. There's absolutely no need to seek external myths or legends when the biblical reality is so rich, complex, and logically consistent within its own framework. We extend our heartfelt gratitude for accompanying us on this detailed exploration, underscored by music, traversing from Genesis to Revelation. Our steadfast goal remains to explore the scriptures with both reverence and intellectual rigor, seeking the answers that are inherently present, patiently awaiting discovery by those unafraid to pose challenging questions. Cain's wife, previously obscured in the shadows of history, steps forward to teach us a vital lesson. Every single detail within the Bible serves a distinct purpose. May this newfound clarity significantly strengthen your confidence in the sacred text, inspiring you to diligently continue your studies, regardless of wherever your own personal land of Nod may happen to be. Always remember that the grand story of redemption is perpetually being written, and each and every one of us, much like the ancients, has a crucial role to actively play. Stay keenly tuned for our upcoming videos, where we will continue to methodically unravel the enduring mysteries of the Old Testament, forgotten prophecies that still resonate today, and the captivating lives of those individuals who significantly shaped the world long before it evolved into the familiar landscape we inhabit today. Until our next discovery, underscored by gentle music, may the illuminating light of the Word serve as your steadfast guide, brightly illuminating your chosen path. But if you currently think the story definitively ends with simply identifying Cain's wife, prepare yourself for a paradigm shift, because we are currently only scratching the surface of a far deeper and more complex theological ecosystem. By gaining a comprehensive understanding of who she truly was, we simultaneously unlock the door to an even more intriguing and surprisingly rarely discussed question from the pulpit. What was daily life genuinely like within the very first civilization, painstakingly founded by this groundbreaking couple within the land of Nod? In order to fully grasp the profound impact of Cain's wife, we must meticulously examine precisely what she tirelessly helped to build and establish. The biblical text reveals that Cain personally constructed a city and then lovingly named it after his son, Enoch. Take a moment to truly think about the sheer magnitude of this extraordinary feat. We aren't merely talking about some rudimentary nomadic camp or a few scattered tents haphazardly arranged around a flickering fire. The original Hebrew term employed for city, year, unequivocally implies a fortified settlement, a place characterized by permanence, intentional structure, and a nascent sense of established order. This undeniable fact leads us to deeply reflect upon the remarkable intellectual capabilities and sheer physical sophistication of those very first human beings. Contrary to the widely propagated and popular evolutionary view depicting crude cavemen fundamentally lacking complex language skills, the Bible presents a radically different vision of humanity, one that, even in its fallen state, somehow miraculously retained extraordinary cognitive abilities. Cain's wife was definitely not simply a mere domestic companion or a subservient helpmate. She was, in fact, the indispensable co-founder of the very first metropolis in human history. She actively and significantly participated in the pivotal transition from a purely agrarian and gathering lifestyle to the deliberate development of burgeoning urbanism. As we carefully delve into the successive generations of descendants stemming from this extraordinary couple, we invariably see something absolutely fascinating unfold before our very eyes. Genesis 4 meticulously details the remarkable flourishing of arts and sciences explicitly within Cain's distinct lineage. We see Jabal, explicitly identified as the father of those who dwell in tents and raise vast herds of livestock. We see Jubal, universally recognized as the father of all those who skillfully play the harp and flute, instruments of beautiful music. And, of course, we see Tubal-Cain, the unparalleled instructor of every craftsman adept in working with both bronze and iron. Why is this particular information directly relevant to our ongoing study of Cain's wife? Simply because it clearly demonstrates that her lineage, the very lineage of the banished, was undeniably pioneering across a diverse range of cultural and technological advancements. This, in turn, inevitably creates a profound and lasting theological paradox for us to carefully consider. Human progress, paradoxically, often flourishes far removed from God's direct presence and guidance. While the lineage of Seth, Adam's third son, consciously focused primarily on fervently calling upon the sacred name of the Lord, the lineage stemming from Cain and his wife, in stark contrast, intently focused on diligently mastering the material world around them. Cain's wife personally witnessed her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren invent revolutionary advancements in metallurgy and in music. She personally witnessed the creation of musical instruments that could be simultaneously utilized to both celebrate the inherent beauty of creation and, conversely, to forge increasingly deadly weapons of war. This duality, this constant tension between the sacred and the profane, represents the very core of the post-fall human experience. The burgeoning civilization that she undeniably helped to initiate in the land of Nod was undeniably vibrant, innovative, and technologically advanced, but it also undeniably carried deep within its fundamental DNA the indelible mark of Cain's initial rebellion. Critics often question why the specific name of Cain's wife was deliberately not recorded, frequently using this conspicuous omission as a flawed argument to diminish the overall validity of the biblical text. However, within the broader context of the ancient Near East, the notable silence regarding her name purposefully serves a distinct narrative purpose. The primary focus of the book of Genesis is consciously not to provide a complete and exhaustive genealogical tree painstakingly detailing every single individual. If that, in fact, were the intended goal, the book would necessarily require thousands upon thousands of pages, just within the initial chapter alone. The fundamental focus lies, instead, upon the overall trajectory of divine sovereignty and the pervasive ramifications of humanity's collective choices. The deliberate anonymity of Cain's wife, therefore, transforms her into a representative figure, a potent symbol. She representatively embodies all of the often overlooked background characters of biblical history, those indispensable individuals who, although absolutely essential for God's grand plan to faithfully unfold, nevertheless generally remain behind the scenes. She serves as a powerful reminder that, for every named biblical hero or villain meticulously recorded within the annals of history, there were inevitably thousands upon thousands of other real people simultaneously living, loving, working diligently, and actively building history. Her very existence unequivocally proves that the Bible should accurately be understood as a highly selective theological summary, and definitely not as a comprehensively detailed diary meticulously recording every single inhabitant of Eden. For those who still genuinely struggle with the somewhat challenging idea of siblings marrying during those earliest of times, we must consciously expand our conceptual understanding of the pre-flood biological reality. If we fully accept the biblical account stating that Adam actually lived for an astounding 930 years, we must simultaneously accept the reasonable implication that the underlying biology of that distant era fundamentally operated under very different conditions that we would generally consider to be superhuman by today's comparatively degraded standards. The detrimental genetic deterioration that currently makes incest inherently dangerous, primarily due to the ongoing accumulation of harmful recessive mutations, simply had not yet occurred to any significant degree during those primeval years. Adam and Eve were originally created with a perfect, pristine genome. A copy of a copy at that early stage was still exceptionally faithful to the original. It was only centuries later, specifically during the time of Moses, that God purposefully established specific laws expressly prohibiting marriage between close relatives, as meticulously detailed within Leviticus 18. This was precisely because, by that comparatively later point in human history, the accumulated genetic mutation load had finally made such unions inherently dangerous for resulting offspring. Therefore, Cain's wife was undoubtedly his sister or, at the very least, his niece. She was an inherent part of a unique generation of human beings whose extraordinary physical capacities and astonishing longevity demonstrably allowed for a sustained demographic expansion that seems virtually impossible for us to accurately imagine within the limited confines of our present day. Another crucially important point is the very meaning of the specific place to which Cain and his wife consciously went. Nod literally and directly translates to wandering or fleeing. The undeniable fact that Cain deliberately settled there and then painstakingly built a city is a deeply tragic irony. God purposefully condemned him to live as a fugitive and a wanderer, but he consciously attempted to settle down through deliberate architecture and purposeful fatherhood. His wife unquestionably played the role of steadfast anchor within that perpetual state of forced exile. Imagine for a moment the sheer strength of character that would be absolutely required in order to faithfully accompany a man personally marked by God himself, a man constantly carrying the indelible stigma of the very first homicide. She was assuredly not merely a passive biological companion. She was an eyewitness to the very first manifestation of God's enduring common grace. Even though Cain had indisputably committed murder, God nevertheless purposefully allowed him to have a wife, to have children, and to have a life. This profoundly teaches us that God's judgment is almost always rarely devoid of some degree of provision for ongoing survival. Cain's wife is nothing if not the deliberate embodiment of that steadfast provision. She stands as irrefutable proof that, even outside the Garden of Eden and even under the weight of a divine curse, life tenaciously insists on flourishing against all odds. To meaningfully close the encompassing circle of this in-depth analysis, we must momentarily turn our attention to how the New Testament directly views the lineage demonstrably initiated by Cain and his wife. The Apostle John notably warns us, specifically within 1 John 3 verse 12, to pointedly not be like Cain, who was undeniably of the evil one. The lineage that decisively began in the land of Nod subsequently became the archetypal prototype of the city of man, consciously set in direct opposition to the eternal city of God. Cain's wife, by giving birth to the very founders of both arts and industries, perhaps unknowingly helped to shape a burgeoning world that would ultimately attempt to become entirely self-sufficient, completely disconnected from its original creator. Her direct descendants ultimately culminate in Lamech, widely recognized as the very first recorded polygamist, who audaciously boasted of his unrepentant violence, as painstakingly documented in Genesis 4 verses 23 to 24. Here, we demonstrably see a troubling progression. Cain's singular sin of murder slowly evolves into an almost celebratory embrace of sin, perpetuated throughout the subsequent generations of his grandchildren. When we thoughtfully examine Cain's wife, we no longer merely see a simple biblical continuity error, but rather a fundamentally critical piece of a much larger historical and spiritual puzzle. She undeniably serves as the crucial bridge connecting the tragically lost perfection of Eden to the noisy, often chaotic complexity of human civilization. She powerfully forces us to consciously confront the stark reality that the enduring biblical story is inextricably grounded in undeniable logical, biological, and social facts, and not merely in disconnected mythologies. Her very existence decisively validates the creation narrative, logically explains the rapid expansion of humanity, and prepares us to better understand why generations later, the entire world would desperately need a complete restart through the catastrophic flood. She represents a silent example of the often overlooked truth that God sees and deliberately uses every single individual, even those whose specific names, times, and stories are deliberately chosen not to be preserved verbatim within the written text. We sincerely hope that this additional journey has brought even more depth to your overall understanding. Here at Genesis to Revelation, we firmly believe that every seemingly difficult question is simply an invaluable invitation to an even greater discovery. The Bible definitely does not shy away from rigorous scrutiny. In fact, it purposefully invites it. Stay diligently with us as we systematically explore the next captivating chapters of this incredible saga. There is significantly much more to be revealed about the enigmatic giants of antiquity, the carefully guarded secrets of the Ark, and the influential lineages that undeniably shaped the very faith that we consciously profess today. Thank you profusely for your evident thirst for meaningful knowledge. Until our next in-depth study, may the enduring Word continue to serve as our one and only infallible compass, reliably guiding us through life's often turbulent and uncertain seas.